Welcome to The Laws of Style, featuring conversations on creativity, fashion, and the law from the leading edge of our economy and culture. Hosted by noted fashion lawyer Douglas Hand.
I'm joined by two menswear industry veterans and founders of a fashion consulting group, E2. A more direct-to-consumer model is both enabling, but also potentially presents higher barriers to entry.
The wholesale account, Saks and Barney's and Blooming's, and that used to be the pretty much your one and only way to enter the market.
The rise of the influencer as a viable model?
I think it's the model of the future. If you can launch a brand with a built-in following, those fans already built in, that's how you're going to succeed.
Collaborations have sort of reached a bit of an apex.
And so some part becomes like, why are we all spending that same dollar? We all spending $1, $5 to get the same one. We could spend $1 to get the same one instead.
It's almost become too saturated. It's almost like another one, like how?
Hello, and welcome to the podcast, The Laws of Style. Downloading to you from the offices of HBA, high above Bryant Park, in the Fashion District of New York City. I'm your host, Douglas Hand, fashion lawyer, fashion law professor, and self-styled, well-dressed man. For this episode, I'm joined by two menswear industry veterans and founders of a fashion consulting group, E2. Eric Jennings, who will go by EJ for the portion of the podcast, and his partner, Erik Ulin. Gentlemen, welcome.
Good to be here. Thank you for having us.
So, really, just tell us about your background, which, respectively, and how each of your career paths led you to form E2.
Oh, what? That's a simple question. Want me to go?
You go.
EJ speaking here
EJ
first.
goes.
Yeah, I been in the fashion industry for 25 years now, and was not my initial plan to go into fashion, but I ended up getting a job in New York City. I grew up in California and kind of fell into the industry and fell in love with it and found my path, and over the course of my career ended up as the fashion director for menswear and home and beauty at Saks Fifth Avenue. So I was there most recently for 9 years, and that's kind of where I made a name for myself in the industry. And through that position at Saks, I met Erik Ulin, and so we've known each other for about 6 or 7 years when he started working at Lindeberg, and we worked together to bring the brand into Saks, back into Saks Fifth Avenue. And then we can talk more about the trade show, because we worked closely at the trade show that he was involved with as well.
Yeah, my background, I think if you asked somebody 20 years ago when I got from college, like who'd be least likely to get into fashion, that'd be me. But that kind of came as a fortunate incident where I think it was like 7 years ago, I was doing restructuring and turnaround consulting at FTI Consulting. I was dealing with the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy at that point, which was interesting, not fun. And I got an email one day from a friend of mine who was the global CEO of Lindeberg, asking me if I knew somebody who might be interested in taking over the U.S. when they're buying out the joint venture. And I said, sure, I sure do. And then 3 months later, I had that job for everything that had to do with it. So that was really my entrance into fashion. And it was a steep learning curve from there, and I got to learn from Eric, like part of from in the Saks group. But then, after about 4.5 years there, I was offered to run the menswear division of UBM. So that means menswear under the trade shows at Magic and Project Market here in New York, and that's where I got to learn even more. And I could actually it was a non-pressure relationship with Eric, because I wasn't trying to sell him anything, and he could actually teach me about the brands that I had at my show. And that's really where we got to know each other a lot better, I'd say, after doing that time. And when Eric had left Saks and I'd left Project, we started talking a lot about what to do and kind of finding what our passions were. And we realized that combining both of our backgrounds, where Eric clearly knows fashion way more than I do, and my background of more kind of the finance and consulting kind of structure piece, then together we would form one very good individual. So therefore, there came the name E2 came from that, and that's where it started. So we're now, I think we're close to 6 months in business now, I think,
exactly.
Which is cool. Yeah,
just at liftoff, which is a great. These are the salad days. Just kind of launching into some specific questions, because you guys are such industry veterans and know the industry so well. I've always found that the transition for a lot of brands, particularly young brands, to a more direct-to-consumer model is both enabling because they have this obviously very direct relationship with their customer, but also potentially presents higher barriers to entry just because the more traditional model, if looking a decade or two in the past, where really all you needed to do was design a line, somehow get it to a presentation or a show where wholesale accounts would see it, and then wholesale accounts would provide you essentially with the funding, and you could bridge some of that cash flow gap with factoring, but you had a real brand that was kind of out there. And if you had international wholesale accounts or even just a national chain wholesale account, you were a brand, and you were a brand to be reckoned with, at least in the minds of the consumer. With direct-to-consumer presenting some barriers to entry, because obviously having a robust e-com presence and having that fulfillment obligation where you're now shipping directly to the consumer is just more expensive. Can you comment on that? Do you view that as enabling for young brands, or is it actually restrictive and makes young brands have to fund more than they did in the past?
Well, I can speak maybe to the first part of the question in terms of the wholesale model, because I actually, for half of my career, worked on the brand side, selling to the wholesale accounts, Saks and Barney's and Blooming's and all those great specialty stores across the country. And that used to be the pretty much your one and only way to enter the market, was through that one channel. And then once you were distributed through those channels, then you might consider opening up your own store. Then you might consider selling on your own website. And now the world is completely backwards. It's just different now. Now they're entering through their own wholesale or their own e-com channel, and then at some point looking to grow into a wholesale model or looking to open up their own brick and mortar. So it's interesting how it completely changed in let's say the last 5 years, really.
Yeah, with Warby Parker or Bonobos being great examples of that, really starting as almost online, tech companies that were pushing a fashion product, but weren't what maybe we at this table would traditionally consider a fashion brand or design-based.
But they've put all their energy into building their brand awareness and recognition through the online channels. Once they've built up this critical mass of followers and a certain size of a business, and then the wholesalers come knocking, like the Nordstroms coming knocking on the Warby Parker store and wanting to bring them in as an exclusive partner because they have a critical mass in terms of their business and their recognition. So now it's almost like, again, going exactly opposite the way it used to be. And so it just is very interesting to see how everything has evolved in the last 5 to 7 years.
Yeah. And Eric, do you think that it is still necessary for those brands that have a robust e-com platform and perhaps even brick and mortar stores to still have wholesale accounts? Or is that, and I think I know the answer to this because we've spoken about it at length, but I'd love your views, and then EJ, you can jump in.
See, I mean, I think that if you look at, thinking back to Eric's comments too, I think one thing that's changed in the last 5 to 7 years, if you look at the Bonobos, Warby Parker, those guys have been around now for a while, and they started at a time where people weren't really looking at that online as a channel. So acquiring new customers wasn't as expensive, whereas now, Facebook, Google, whoever, they've caught up and said, okay, cool, we can actually charge more for this. So now I think what you're seeing is a development where, as the cost of acquiring a customer online is becoming more expensive, they're going to the other channels too, whether that's like physical retail or a wholesaler to kind of get more customers. That is almost like a paid customer acquisition channel. Versus, so I think if the cost was as low as it was 10 years ago to get customers online, you'd see them do it all day long. But now they have to go into the other channels because it's kind of like, it's not saturated, but it's not, the economics aren't there in the same way. And so that kind of brings us back to the first part where, younger brands that are coming online, the real barrier to entry is the customer acquisition and how much it costs you to actually get those customers. That's my view, at least. And I think you can see that part happening right now too. Let's see, back with your question was in terms of...
Well, really in terms of the barriers to entry.
Yeah,
of those young brands.
But I think that comes like, I think the traditional model is like, okay, you get wholesale orders, you can factor them, you can sell them, you can kind of finance upon them. But now you're seeing, companies like, let's say, like a Hilden or those kind of to start to experiment with funding like e-commerce growth. Like they're doing more kind of the direct-to-consumer growth, which is a riskier venture, but it kind of comes with the territory that you kind of have to look at that. One part that I think I commented on, like during your class at NYU, was one of my favorite, like, my favorite likenesses around this is one by Brian Trunzo at WGSN.
Yeah.
He wrote this piece. He has a newsletter he writes, and he wrote a piece kind of comparing, what like the traditional model back to like the MMA circuit of the 1990s, where like either you did boxing or you did like jiu-jitsu or you did judo, and it was like which one was best. Whereas now anybody goes into MMA, they know all of them. They all have Muay Thai, they all have Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they all know something like that. So it's more like you have to be versed in everything to be able to be good today. So I think it's not a choice of where I think you can have a strength in one area, but you probably need to have exposure on all channels, whether that's your online e-commerce, your own retail brick and mortars, and the wholesale. I think you need to have a good balance of those. I don't think anybody really can expect to achieve success on just one pillar alone, unless you have a ton of money to do it yourself. But I think you need to have a strategy that kind of encompasses all channels.
And, for our listeners, equal balance, do you mean literally 33% each, or do you think that it's...
No, I mean, I think that all depends on your brand, I think. I mean, I think certain brands do better online, but I think it's good to have, like, if you look at wholesale to acquire customers, maybe that's like you need to be in 10 really strong specialty stores, for instance, that really drive your brand. If you're a streetwear brand, for instance, maybe you don't have to be like 100 accounts across the country, and you don't have to be in every Nordstrom, but for you to get that customers looking for something new, perhaps that's the place to go. And so that might be a smaller portion, but it still figures as a part of your business, I think.
Also, I think for positioning, when you're looking at your brand and how you want it positioned in the market, you want to pick those right wholesale accounts that put you in good company, that expose you to the customers that are shopping for those brands. Take a look at Kith going into Bergdorf. That's all about positioning. They could have gone into any other store, but Kith decided to position themselves and align themselves with Bergdorf to be put into the realm of those more advanced designers and that luxury customer, even though it's a streetwear brand.
Right. And I suppose that was always the case, but now more than ever, as you're looking at that wholesale account almost being part of your marketing spend, or...
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's a marketing expense.
Well, so back to customer acquisition, and that being, potentially one of the barriers of entry. Do you view the rise of the influencer and sort of the star designer who may have began as someone of note, perhaps in the menswear industry or women's wear, if it's a women's wear designer, but with a following somewhat built in, who kind of pivots and becomes a branded, consumer product juggernaut as a viable model, or is that a shallow model that will easily be sort of upturned once the consumers realize if the product is not up to snuff and not as good as products from other brands, that they're not really getting what they're paying for?
I think it's the model of the future. I mean, it's definitely happening right now. We see it, but I see it as being incredibly valuable, incredibly important. I think of the New Guards group that has Off-White, Marcelo Burlon, Palm Angels, Heron Preston. They're building brands based on personalities that have big followers. Marcelo being a DJ, Virgil Abloh also, in the art world, in the DJ, in the architecture. Like, these are people that are highly influential, and they have an incredible breadth and of the way they were able to communicate to their followers. And so tapping into those followers and then building a brand around that in an authentic way, which is a word that's often thrown around, maybe a little bit too much these days. But it really, if you can launch a brand with a built-in following, those fans already built in, that's how you're going to succeed. It's very difficult to start with just a good product, because quite frankly, there's lots of good product out there. There's too much good product out there. So you have to have a real point of view, something that is distinctively different than what else is out there. And so tapping into the personalities of these influencers is a way to do that.
Yeah, I mean, product quality is basically table stakes anyway. Like, everybody who buys it, it's a given. You should have that anyway. It's like, if you come with something not that fine, it'll be very short-lived. But nobody really does it that way.
And as fashion director at Saks, I had so many brands coming up to me saying, "Oh, we have such good quality, we have such good fit, like, yeah, you and everybody else out there. Like, what's the big deal? That's a given. What's different about you? Like, our store is full of amazing product. What is different about your brand? And so you have to really tap into the thing that makes you influential. That's going back to the question about influencers. What makes you unique? What makes you different? Whether you're a DJ or an architect or whatever that is, having that built-in following.
Yeah. Well, perhaps relatedly to customer acquisition, I read recently that Adidas is doing a Beavis and Butthead collaboration, and collaborations have sort of reached a bit of an apex, I think. We see a new collaboration announced. We see several new collaborations announced weekly. What are your views on this? And do you think we have reached an apex, or that it is a moment, for a brand to create sort of some media impressions and just get eyeballs on the product, perhaps from a different perspective? I'm not sure who the Beavis and Butthead sort of fan base is. It's clearly a 90s. I mean,
probably me.
If listeners don't know. But could you do a quick impression? Or?
Well, no, I used to play that in the 90s, but no. But anyway.
But pulling in someone who was influenced by MTV in the 90s to a brand which, I think Adidas is a juggernaut, right? That's a massive, massive brand. But obviously they may have felt like this is good alignment for a short period of time, and to create some media impressions around something that will move the needle for us for a short time. So what are your views collectively on collaborations? Have they jumped the shark? And the brands that you work with, do you encourage them to do collabs or not?
I don't think it's quite jumped the shark, but it's getting close. In my opinion, it's getting real close. That's a Fonzie Happy Days reference, right?
It is. Okay. I know. I'm going way
We're showing our age there.
Well, the other collab I read last week was Grease, and I forget the name of the brand, but they're coming out with a capsule collection based on Grease, which of course is a movie from the 70s, but based in the 50s. So I'm not sure what audience you're going for there. A couple, perhaps.
Sorry.
No, I actually like collaborations, but I do think it's almost become too saturated. It's almost like another one. Like, how, what does it mean anymore? If they're done well, and if it's authentic to each brand's DNA in some aspect, rather than just for hype and just for buzz, then I think it can serve a very, a good purpose.
I mean, some part comes back to also with customer acquisition there too. It's a vehicle to acquire new customers for either one, and that's you could get some sort of economies of scale on that by just combining forces, or even taking two halves of marketing budget put into one. So you're not spending all that money, both of you, but getting the same customer, because everybody's going after the same customer as well. Like, anybody who buys a car also buys clothes, also goes to hotels and restaurants. And so some part becomes like, why are we all spending that same dollar? Are we all spending $1, $5 to get the same one? We can spend $1 to get the same one instead. So I think some part becomes just from the cost of doing business, that you have to kind of do some collaborations, and whether that's like between brands or with partners who serve the lifestyle of your customer, from hotels to restaurants to airlines to cars, whatever.
Which do you think are more effective? The ones that are brands which are perhaps in the same product category but different customers, or adjacent product categories, or completely disparate product categories where you wouldn't necessarily think of it, but
I mean, some part of it depends on what's your goal with it, right? Like if you do like two very kind of unlikely combinations, then perhaps it's more for the media splash to get your name out there and not necessarily selling so much, right? Where if you do, I can't really do, well, let's say like Rowing Blazers and Noah, for instance.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty interesting one.
Greg Lauren and Montclair.
Yeah.
Or, these not even adjacent categories, same category.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, then it can make sense just kind of piggybacking on each other's brands and try to get after the customer and serve better value to your customer, perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I think it all comes into like, what do you want it to do for you? For some, like when it's a big brand and a small brand, who's kind of benefiting, or both are benefiting. One perhaps is getting more exposure, one being, okay, hey, we're doing something new. Mm-hmm. So, it's hard to say which one works best, but I think there's all examples of stuff that has gone better and worse.
Yeah, the legacy brands are trying to tap into the new, young, cool demographic, and the young, cool kids want to get the exposure that they can get with a legacy heritage brand. So it definitely benefits both. I think just going into that with a clear strategy, is this for marketing?
Yeah.
Is this for brand awareness? Or is this to drive sales? And you got to be very clear. Both parties need to be very clear going into that partnership, what that end goal is.
Yeah. Well, pivoting a little bit, on the design side, I think we all work with designers, and I feel like there's always been a little bit of a stigma in the design circles about being too commercial. That you want to be a design, to be a designer is not necessarily to be commercial. It's to be artistic, to be avant-garde, to have something walk down a runway that is unique. With the rise of the influencer designer, do you think that sort of mode of thinking is fading into the past, or do you think that it's still present with designers? And then as a follow-up part of that question, do you think there's anything wrong with being too commercial?
I mean,
again, I don't want to keep on hogging the mic here, but
go for it.
'Cause I have a strong opinion about that. I think the influencer designers are more commercially minded than the designer. And I've worked with hundreds on both sides of that spectrum. The designer often is so caught up in the art of design that they would be just as happy hanging their product in an art gallery. Like, to them, it doesn't matter. Whereas the influencers they're more commercially minded. They understand the commerce part of fashion, and I found them to be a little bit more, when it comes to driving business and sales, much more savvy. And I've worked with some amazing creative designers that are just so wrapped up in the art of it that they sometimes forget that you're going to be out of business soon if people don't start buying this at full price.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So.
Yeah, maybe, but I think you see more and more examples of designers who basically design a commercial line, but then they have their name brand line is what like the commercial line funds that.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all know some examples of that, but I think that's a way to kind of to make, they still, I think you clearly still have to pay your bills. And so there's a portion of kind of figuring out that unless you have somebody with super deep pockets, it doesn't matter, doesn't mind what you do, then cool. But most people don't have that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think to Eric's point, I think from the influencer designers also kind of know they have a finite lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
So the lifespan of their influence can also be finite. So it's kind of like, okay, how do I make the most of this while I have it?
Yeah.
I could see that be at one point too. So kind of building yourself into a brand that can actually sustain yourself over a longer period of time.
What are some contemporary brands that you guys like from, and I mean, that's a loaded question. So from a design perspective and product execution perspective first, and then from a customer engagement perspective and business savvy perspective, who's doing it right from the perspective of selling stuff?
One of my favorite brands that I've known and worked with for a couple of years is Axel Arigato,
Okay.
the Swedish sneaker brand.
Okay.
I don't know, something about them. They came into the market with a cool idea, with a great product, very clear vision of who they are and how they wanted to position themselves, what channels they wanted to play in, whether that was e-commerce, whether that was wholesale or their own retail. They took a look at their own retail and turned that into their Instagram moment. It was built to be something that was going to be shared through Instagram. And then being very selective about their wholesale partners and then really driving their e-commerce business. It's very rare that you have new young brands like that are so savvy in all three channels and that were so strategic and cerebral about market entry and how much they wanted penetration in those channels. So for me, it was Axel Arigato from Sweden is one of the younger brands that I found emerging that was doing it right.
Got it. Thanks, EJ. Eric.
I mean, I have a hard time arguing with Eric about that. No, I mean, I think there's several. If I take it from Sweden, I like Stutterheim. Note that's a client of ours too, but I do like them as a brand. They've been around in Sweden for a long time, and there's still somebody that's known, I'd say, like from in the fashion circle, and they've taken a category that's perhaps not the biggest one, but they're really taking the forefront of that category, right? So there's rain jackets. And not cheap, but not like over expensive either, but very nice, very clean, and very, very Scandinavian in their approach. I think that's something that has wheels. I think I mean, Eric and I have been very focused on like the Nordic market. I think overall in terms of the aesthetic and the branding from there, and I think that's something that's interesting in the market now. But they've stayed true to who they are, and I think that's a part too. Also, where you can see a lot of people just kind of expanding to everything, where this doesn't become genuine anymore. And I think Stutterham's really I mean, they've stayed. You know, it's rain jackets, but I mean, like they've stayed very true to like any expansion they do is relevant to that category, and it's not something that's gonna go. They're not gonna do rain jeans anytime soon.
Do they do umbrellas?
They do umbrellas. They do. I mean, anything like it's like rainwear, right? So it's it's umbrellas, hats, and boots, like anything rain associated.
Okay,
that's where they are. So I like that part. I mean, another person I think that does a good job here in the U.S. is Todd Snider. I think he does a good job with his collection and kind of working with third-party like brands as well in his store, where he doesn't necessarily need to produce everything himself, but he kind of combines it with brands that fit into that lifestyle.
Yeah.
Which I think is smart.
Yeah, his store, which I know we've all been to, is really kind of one of these little mini malls to a degree, but everything aligned with the Todd Snider brand and a very comfortable environment to be in.
I went to a great book launch there not too long ago.
Weird.
It's a great book called The Laws of Style. I'm really impressed.
Yeah. Well, that was
shameless
a lot of
plug.
Fun. Shameless plug. Thank you, Richard. Well, maybe flipping into the Laws of Style a little bit. So, that was my definitive work on, how service professionals are best advised to dress for work and to not only interact with their clients, but also, generate new client opportunities. So you guys now on the consulting side and with your clients and out getting new clients, how do you look to present yourselves sartorially? And do you follow the laws of style, or do you turn your back on them as non-lawyers and non-finance people? Because my book is quite specific to a certain segment of sort of the third-party consultant world.
I follow whatever Eric says. That's basically I get that. Like I have to
the laws of EJ.
The laws of EJ is basically what rules this part.
We call it, or I don't know, but dress for your day. Look at your calendar. Who are you going to see? Dress accordingly. If you've got a presentation, or if you're going to you're making a pitch, or if you're working from Soho House. I mean, really dress for your day. I don't wear jeans a whole lot, although I am wearing jeans today. But yeah, just taking a look at who you're meeting with, and then making sure that you're dressed appropriately, and that's very fluid, and that I like that. And I used to wear a lot of suits in my career, a lot of suits. I have a closet full of suits.
He does, and I use some stuff from there when I need to dress up sometimes.
You're a little. I mean, EJ and I are about the same height and weight, maybe, but you're a little bit of a taller bloke.
I run a lot, so I try to keep into like that sample size. Is what I try to do. That's the only reason why I do it.
38 long.
There you go.
I think a soft blazer. I mean, if we're going to talk about professional, what would that essential piece be? It would be some type of a soft blazer. It doesn't have to be super constructed. A blazer that you can wear with jeans if you're wearing jeans for that day. But that's a knit shirt underneath it. You can't go wrong with that. You're still, regardless of who you're meeting with, you're gonna look put together.
Mm-hmm. Well, today you knew you were doing the podcast, and we can flip into a feature of every podcast, which are my 4W questions about what you're wearing. So, starting with the first W, just the what, for people who aren't watching on YouTube, if you could just quickly describe each of you, what you have on from a product perspective.
Okay.
EJ will start.
Okay. So I've got a camel cashmere turtleneck and a kind of a hybrid knit blazer. So it's a check in the front and then a knit sleeve, almost like a knit collar on there. And a pair of super tight jeans, maybe a little too tight, from Marcelo Burlon.
Are they skinny jeans?
Yeah.
Are they build as skinny jeans? Okay.
With my build, honestly, they just looks better on me.
Yeah.
Like the baggy boot cut is just not right. And then a pair of suede Chelsea boots.
Yeah.
And a Shinola watch.
Okay.
Another brand that I'm a big fan
Well,
of.
I'll get to the W of who.
Oh, so sorry. Oops.
That's all right.
Oops.
So, Eric?
I hate following EJ on these things. This is the worst. Shirt.
Shirt, pants.
I have a plaid button down and a blue sweater. Blue is usually my color that I go for. A pair of, I guess, distressed denim, also kind of skinny, and then a pair of leather what do we call these boots? Just regular boots?
Chukka boots.
Chukka boots. There you go.
Okay, and so flipping to the who, but staying with you, Eric, and
Okay.
EJ, you can follow up on
All
this.
right.
So who makes each of these items?
Throwback. The sweater is Jay Lindeberg. And then Saturdays is the button down. I have Jean Shop are the jeans, and then Trask are the shoes.
And EJ?
Oh, so I'm wearing Eleventy, which is an Italian brand for the jacket and the turtleneck, and then Marcello Burlon, and then Aquatalia are the suede waterproof Chelsea boots.
Those are very nice. And a question that often doesn't really get answered, because I think for a lot of men, and I do have a lot of men on the show, the seasonality of when things are produced is kind of lost on them, but you guys as fairly educated consumers here, do you happen to know from what season and year each of these things came from, or any one of these items? And it may just be your jacket that's relevant to that, because Eric is wearing mainly basics, and everything but the jacket is kind of a basic.
Yeah, this is the sweater and the jacket are fall 18. They're
Okay.
current season, and then the jeans are these are 2 years old, I think.
Okay.
And then the boots are fall 17.
Okay. And then the why, I think we got to. I mean, you knew you were being on the podcast, which is a fairly relaxed environment. You'd be in front of me, and we're all friends. So, that sort of answers it. I also, there's an adherence to the weather, of course. I mean, you sort of look outside. I now check my phone pretty regularly. I, too, have suede on. I was banking on no rain, and it looks like no rain. I mean, it said no rain, even though it was a foggy day here. But there's always that, and I find, in New York or Paris or London, for these four-season cities, you have that great benefit. I know you two have both spent a lot of time, overseas and also on the West Coast. How would you advise men who are in a city like Los Angeles, who maybe don't have the benefit, or maybe they feel liberated by it? It's not the benefit; it's just, hey, I don't have to dress for four seasons. But for the LA guy who's looking at fall, winter, and saying, God, I love that pea coat, but when am I going to wear it? How does he up his sartorial game, basically in spring, summer only?
Yeah, I think he moves to New York. Honestly, I just flew in from Colombia, and I was in Miami and then Colombia, South America, just this morning, as a matter of fact. And again, as a person who works in fashion, I'm always looking at what people are wearing, and literally it was 90% humidity and 90 degrees yesterday, and in Miami also now going into their high season where it's extremely warm and humid, and I think it's looking at finding fall colors in lightweight fabrications, like we did in one of our private label brands at Saks. We did a fall linen specifically for the southern tier. So it was a great fabric that looked like a fall flannel, but it was actually 100% linen. So it had the breathability and the lightness. So if you're in those warmer Sunbelt regions, I would look for those lightweight fabrications in fall colors.
But also, if you want to suck it up, you buy it and you have it for that one time you go to New York. I mean, I have suede jackets. I have 2-3 days a year I can actually wear them. When you're really sure it's not going to rain outside, but it's about 55 degrees to 60 and it's sunny, that's cool. I've had a couple of days.
Yeah.
A couple of days, but not often.
It's a thing of beauty.
You know who does it the best is Italian men dressing in the summer. Like if you all have been to Pitti in the summertime, does not matter if it's 103 degrees there. They will have on the shirt, the jacket, the double-breasted, the tie, the accessories. They do not alter.
They have no sweat
But
glands.
the fabrication is also very,
It'll
very
be
light.
linen. It'll be cotton.
Unlined.
It'll be unlined. It'll be half lined. It'll be all adjusted, but they will not skimp on their look because it's warm out.
I was just in
American
Paris.
men can learn from that.
Absolutely. And from Parisian men or French men. I mean, I was just in Paris where, I sort of call it the city of scarf envy. Like I just, I mean, I just don't have the scarf game to go toe to toe with those
Tough
guys
one.
because, the folds they have, and it just looks so perfect. I wonder if they iron them.
Yeah.
Or, there's something about it. But I think American men have a lot to learn from their European counterparts for sure. What other cities, you both being well traveled and Eric, international. What other cities beyond the obvious ones do you think men execute well?
I mean, I'll go back to my hometown of Stockholm. I think they do it pretty well. I think there's a certain sense of conformity in terms of what's fashionable, but it's usually very well put together and pretty clean. And I mean, I kind of like that part about the Swedish part, the Swedish sense of fashion. I think especially like downtown Stockholm, or if you go to Gothenburg or Malmo, and Copenhagen too, like all those places are pretty fashionable. And you see, I'd say like the suits are more so a thing there than they are here. I feel like here, like the moment it was okay to wear like jeans and a jacket, it's like, all right, done doing that. Like suits are dead. Whereas if you go to Europe, like the suit game is still there.
Yeah.
And pocket squares are alive.
Sans tie though, right?
Sans tie, but pocket square kind of steps in for the tie a little bit. I felt that last time I was in Stockholm was in the summer. And I was walking around, so like everybody had a pocket square. I was like, it's still alive.
Yeah.
It's still here.
Well, and you throw on the scarf, which, to borrow from the Italian man who will wear a scarf in the middle of summer, which is another scarf game I would love to elevate to, but can't seem to.
It's a tough one.
That can add a nice dash of color in a pretty basic wardrobe.
But I say, I mean, if I may on that one, I think the one thing you get into having come into fashion from something was not fashion. I mean, going from consulting where you have like a pair of slacks and 3 shirts, that's what you go for a trip with. Then going from that to going to Pitti, well, the first time I went to Pitti was like, 2.5 years ago. I think I packed like 3 suitcases because I had no idea. I had like, 8 different outfits and I was super nervous about it, which in retrospect was a little bit overpacking. But I think one thing that I learned going into J. Lindeberg was like also looking at accessorizing, bringing in those pieces that elevate your suit or your jacket, like if it's a puffer vest or whatever. Like those are pieces you don't necessarily think about investing like unless you're into fashion, but they actually do help you quite a bit to kind of make elevate your wardrobe, so you can actually make more variation to it.
Yeah.
And I think there's like people just don't know about it, like the man at least, like the American man I think doesn't necessarily know and doesn't really want to invest in it right now, but they're getting there.
I mean, I think for suits, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is one of the laws, that there really are 4 fundamental suits that every man should have and should overinvest in. Before you're buying a white linen suit or an olive double-breasted peak lapel suit, your navy blue pinstripe, your charcoal pinstripe, your gray flannel, and just a navy blue suit. Just over invest in those. And as you are able to afford better versions, you can take those older versions and kind of zhuzh them up with a little, you can change the lining, you can change the buttons, you can, for your next navy blue pinstripe, maybe that's double-breasted instead of single-breasted. Maybe it's a 3-button profile, maybe it's a 1-button profile, but like, you can explore so much within that framework, always knowing you're going to look good and always knowing that with other accessories, you can make that outfit into hundreds, if not even thousands of outfits, just based on accessorizing.
I'd say one thing that's becoming, I think, more difficult in a way, suits are it's a fairly simple thing for a man to put on a suit and look good in it. Like we were up visiting another consulting firm, a management consulting firm, and just seeing their office environment where they're in the office, it's very much like casual, but it's dressy casual, which like it's very hard to define what that means.
Yeah.
And you see these people walking around, like some of them are very well put together. They have like jeans, they have the right tops, they have like like a nice cardigan, whatever they have on, like they put it together well. But then you see like the kids out of school coming in like 23, 24, great at school, all that stuff, like they would fit well in a suit, but coming in like not sure about how to dress themselves up in a way where casual is also dressy, because you can make that happen.
Yeah.
But it's more difficult. And I think that's coming more and more, because if you look at just like where the dress code is evolving, because they have to, because people are not necessarily, unless you're like in banking and more like you look at traditional law firms, like it's much more the suit and tie is kind of the given. Whereas if you go into really any other corporate environment, like it's not necessarily that.
Yeah. Eric, I know that when you were at Saks, you were a big proponent for kind of the new office wardrobe and having Saks put out some sort of a guidebook on a seasonal basis for that, which I think is very important, because to Eric's point, I think the bar is very high in terms of level of difficulty executing business casual well.
Yeah, we launched this. I read it was the Wall Street Journal, and they listed 5 major banks that all went business casual. And like I Googled the number of employees at each bank, and it was hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of people being told from one day to the next, like you don't have to wear a suit anymore. You can dress casual.
Yeah.
Like that's a daunting proposition for anybody all of a sudden, because a suit is the easiest thing in the world. You put it on, you look great, it's flattering, done. But if you don't get that little crutch, then it becomes very difficult. So we went through a whole initiative, came out with a guidebook for the new office casual, and we called it the new office casual because most of us aren't, working just in an office environment. It could be on a train, a plane, in an automobile, in a cafe. So that's kind of like the new office casual. Could be anywhere. But when we tried to implement this with our own guidebook, and then said we can't just talk the talk, we got to walk the walk. So we went out to all the associates around all stores across the country, said, hey, guess what? You too can dress casual to work, but these are the guides. And there were 5 or 6 rules or guides that we felt like if they did that, they'd be in good shape. So the first Saturday was the first new office casual at Saks. Disaster. It was like, like everybody went into a panic because it didn't work. It's hard, Yeah. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but we had to, do another training. We had to send more detailed information out so that it took a few weeks to get right, but it finally did. But so we were trying to, assist our customers too that were faced with the same dilemma.
Yeah.
And, sometimes the old guard would be afraid of, we're not selling suits. It's the end of the world. We're not going to make any money. The truth is, if you add up this knit cashmere sweater and the knit blazer and the pants and all the suede shoes, that's going to equal much more than just a suit. You can actually make more sales by, redoing the whole wardrobe in a way that's more relevant for today's life.
And it's arguably more seasonal.
And
because
more
unlike
seasonal.
the suit,
100%,
right.
100%.
Those 4 suits I described are seasonless,
yeah.
right? So once
which
you
is kind of amateurish. You know what I mean? Like if if you're just wearing these basic suits all year round, it's a little snoozy, a little amateurish. Whereas I think you really look more professional and you look more interesting when you are dressing seasonally, in a way that's a little more casual but also professional at the same time.
So what are some of those must-have items? You mentioned the soft blazer, which I completely agree with. Unlined,
Mm-hmm.
Can sometimes have a button profile all the way up the top, but a nice sort of roll to it.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously knits. But describe a few outfits that either of you think are business appropriate, but still well within that business casual realm.
Yeah, I think the knit, whether it's a turtleneck or a crew neck or a polo knit, or a Johnny collar knit, they all look great underneath a soft blazer. We talked about patterned shirts too, because the guys kind of thought, it's either a solid or a stripe. Well, you can do different patterns. There's micro patterns out there. There's little micro prints. There's micro checks. So it's not just about solid shirts and striped shirts. We talked about the leather bag also, because let me tell you, I have seen so many guys in nice suits and like a JanSport nylon backpack on the subway, and you're just like, oh man, dude, you killed it. In a bad way, not in a good way.
Right.
If you have that leather bag, whether it's a tote or a briefcase or even a backpack, you still look professional, you still look put together. We talked about the hybrid shoe. So it's leather shoe on top, but maybe a more casual sole on the bottom. So it gives you that, that professional but also casual vibe.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that we talked about.
Yeah, I mean, there's this anecdote in the Laws of Style about the closing of the Citicorp Travelers merger, and I'm not disclosing anything insider here, and it's a very dated merger, but the guy who produced the final document on the closing table, and this is back when you did closings all in a room, and there were probably 35 people in this room. He came in, he was well-dressed and everything, but he pulled the final document out of this old, Eddie Bauer satchel bag. So it kind of read briefcase, but it was made of canvas. It was beaten to shit. He'd probably had it all the way through business school.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of took the air out of the room.
Yeah.
There was no
I hear you.
reverence or ceremony to
hear
it.
you.
And,
Yep.
when you're toting important documents for clients, I think, it doesn't need to be the Zero Halliburton metal case exactly with the nuclear codes in it, but just a proper briefcase.
Yeah, and it should be leather. Sorry, it just should be leather.
Yeah.
I don't care what the model is, but it's got to be leather.
It's going to last you forever.
Yeah.
Well, there traditionally has been a big dichotomy, obviously, between menswear and womenswear. we're seeing that shift recently, and there are now brands that position themselves completely as unisex. Is there a future in that? Do you think that that's just kind of a moment that is, people are latching on to a moment where that's not only acceptable but garners some press because of its newness? Or is that the future? Eric?
When I get that question, it seems weird. I think there's a way to kind of position yourself to be attractive to the younger consumer who does not necessarily look in the same way at kind of traditional gender norms. I think as like if you look at today's like teenagers, for instance, like it's kind of like you're looking at like who's going to be spending going forward. Because I was talking to my wife the other day where we were saying, all this talk about millennials. Yes, it's the biggest generation, but they're actually 35 years old at this point. That's the oldest millennial is 35 years old. So it's not like this like young. It's not this like spoiled 17-year-old. Like it's not that. So you look at like you kind of have to position yourself to say, okay, what's that new growth going to come from, and how can I do it? How can I address that whole generation to what their priorities are? And so I could say that going into there, I've a hard time saying whether that's going to be like the future for everybody, but I think for a good swath of that population is probably pretty relevant, I'd say.
Yeah. I think there certainly is more synergy between men's and women's collections. It used to be, you would see the women's runways, and then a year later you would see variations of that incorporated into the men's runway. Mm-hmm. Now that there's not that distance between what you see on the women's runways and the men's runways. They're much more integrated. I like that. What I don't like is unisex clothing brands. Honestly, I just don't. I'm not really into it. I don't think I want to go into a store and look on a rack and have like women on either side of me shopping for that same thing. It just doesn't appeal. I don't know, to me. But I do see those brands, more and more of them kind of popping up. I don't know what the future is. But I do think that there is just more comfort with young men and women buying from brands that incorporate the same elements, the same colors, the same details, the same motifs. Like, that's totally cool to me. But it's those very minimal, unisex, boxy, baggy. Like, it doesn't really fit, your body right. Because men's and women's body, they're just different. Hello. Yeah. And you want something that's flattering on a man's body or on a woman's body. So,
what other trends are you guys seeing in the industry, menswear or apparel broadly considered, that you think are worth noting?
You're it.
Once again, let's see.
There you go.
The whole logo thing I found very interesting. The whole logo thing. And I think it came about because of fast fashion knocking off runway so quickly that a way for the designer brands to combat was to really tap into their own logo. The
legal protection of the trademark.
Yeah.
There's no way to copy it without
reinterpret
truly...
the logo, put it on there. It's like, you can't copy it. Those fast fashion retailers can't copy your logo, and people will pay for that. They want credit for the money that they're spending on designer brands. And so I think I kind of like these heritage legacy brands going after their own logo again. Now, what's the lifespan of that? I don't know. Like, it's kind of hit the apex. I mean, it's really, I think it's just become it's so in your face right now that in fashion, one season you're in, one you're out. So I think that may start to decline. And that's one of the reasons why Eric and I both like these Nordic brands, because they're not into that at all. It's clean, it's modern, it's a little more minimal, but still very, very, very chic and cool looking, but absolutely no logos on those, especially on those Nordic brands that we see right now.
I'd say one thing that I see, I mean, if I look at your previous guest, Jack, with Rowing Blazers, I think that's one part, kind of tapping into a kind of you find out who your consumer is and really look at like that niche base. You don't necessarily make something for the broader audience. You're looking at like, okay, who is my base and how do I talk to them in a relevant way for them? So that can be anything, but I think those, like, it's not, I mean, Rowing Blazers as a concept it's probably not going to be, all over the place. Like, everybody's not going to wear it, but he's tapped into this, like this audience that likes what he's doing with the brand, and they like what he's doing. They like that, and he keeps talking to that group, which I think is important. I think this is really kind of focusing on that niche, and I think that's, I would say like if anything, we've kind of seen like in our current political climate, that's kind of what is dominating, like finding your base and going for that base. And it's the same for a fashion brand, like finding like who your base is, what's your voice, who does it appeal to, and just go for that.
What's interesting too is his base is also so wonderfully disparate, though.
Yeah.
You see Japanese guys wearing it, you see guys who are skateboarders wearing it, you see guys who are wearing, Kith and Supreme with it, and then you see your traditional someone who was on the U.S. rowing team or the Princeton crew.
In his store, you can have like there can be a 25-year-old guy and a 75-year-old guy, and then finding like an item that they like, because it's built on something. It's a feeling, it's a movement that he's built on, not specifically on who you are as a person physically.
Right.
It's more about like what is it you buy into the brand, which I think is pretty brilliant.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, that's a wrap.
All right,
Thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
A lot of fun.
Yeah. So, listeners, please take a look on YouTube. You can watch our glorious faces and even see some of these items. And please follow me at Hand of the Law on Instagram and Twitter. Any shout outs from you guys other than maybe the Movember Foundation and my mustache, but any follows from you guys or shout outs otherwise?
Yeah, you can follow me at EJNY
and
on
me,
Instagram
and me
and
at
Twitter.
At Erik Ulin, one word with a K, on Instagram. That's basically where I am. You can see my morning run pictures all the time and get annoyed. That's what I want.
I'm annoyed because I live 2 blocks from you and I'm
You're
not
welcome.
out there running with you.
We did run once, so there's that.
Once.
Yeah.
There's that one time. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
You've been listening to The Laws of Style with Douglas Hand. For more information, go to our website at www.hballp.com. And you can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Hand of the Law. Thank you for tuning in, and stay stylish.